Greetings, classmates. For my final presentation, I chose to research Alaska basketry. Basket weaving is an important aspect of Alaska Native culture and one of the most interesting phases of Native life. Using materials readily available and unique to the environment, the technique, handed from one generation to the next, produces baskets that are not only practical but artistically appealing. The wealth and diversity of basketry traditions of Alaska Native peoples comes from the massive physical size of Alaska, the variety of its landscapes and climates, and its location. Basket weaving, begun as a necessity to everyday life, was a task for the women, but one they were proud of, and they incorporated beauty with functionality. Young girls were taught the skill at a very early age. Once traders arrived in Alaska, other options for everyday life necessities were available, and basket weaving transitioned more to the tourist trade and a way to make an income. There are 4 distinct types of basket construction: the spruce root basket, the birch bark basket, the wild rye grass basket, and the Eskimo coiled beach grass basket. All 4 types of baskets involved a laborious process of collecting and preparing the natural resources before actually the weaving began. Each of the basket styles will be described in the past tense, and this is to symbolize the past when baskets were utilitarian and necessary. The Tlingit twine spruce root basket is the most famous and probably the oldest of all basketry traditions. The baskets were woven in a solid, substantial way, yet with a fine weave that made them pliable. They were ornamented with geometric angles and figures around the baskets. Roots of the Sitka spruce gathered in the spring or early summer were used to make the baskets. Women went into the woods with digging sticks to prod for roots. After locating a desired root, it was removed from the ground, rolled in coils so the bark could be stripped off, and then it was left to cure over the summer. The splitting process came next. Cured root coils were soaked in water, split down the middle by using the teeth and thumbnails, sometimes split a second or third time, and then put into skeins for later use. Designs on the spruce root basket only showed on the outside and were created from a false embroidery of grass stems dyed to the desired color. The grasses were harvested from areas near water or in the shade of trees. After taking off the blades, the stems were placed in boiling water and laid out to dry. Traditional dye colors were black, a purplish black, red shades running through brown to orange, and sometimes yellow and blue-green. Dye colors came from whatever was available in the area. Then the grass strings would be soaked in the color solution. Black came from black mud of the sulfur springs or iron filings, purplish black from dark blue huckleberries, red from urine. Sometimes alder bark, leaves of nettles, the lining of hemlock bark, or the watery substance from sea urchins was added to the urine to make other shades of red. Yellow came from a solution of wolf moss, and blue-green from boiling hemlock bark and urine and adding oxide of copper. Once the grasses were dyed to the desired color, they were split. And this again was another tedious process. Sometimes they were split once, twice, maybe a third time, depending on the need. The process of actually weaving the baskets began. The baskets served a meaningful role in every aspect of Tlingit life. It was a utilitarian, ceremonial, and religious. The Tlingit did not understand pottery making or metalworking, so baskets were made to be used. There were various shapes that were made for different purposes, such as small baskets to be carried around or worn. Cylindrical baskets could store food. They would cook in them. They would use them for their dishes. They even had non-waterproof baskets that were used for straining, collecting clams, and so forth. At the turn of the century, when white traders were found in many parts of southeastern Alaska, the beauty of the Tlingit baskets was recognized. Traders urged the women to weave them to sell. As basket makers wove baskets for the growing tourist trade, the baskets tended to be made smaller, less durable, had narrower ornamentation, and used aniline dyes instead of native dyes. The Haida also produced the twine split root baskets. They were characterized, though, by simplicity, and simple brown bands were the decoration. Interestingly, the Haida wove their baskets upside down, and the Tlingit wove in an upright position, and this resulted in baskets whose weaves slanted in opposite directions. Athabascan birch bark baskets also used willow and spruce roots for lacing. The birch bark baskets are an envelope form of basket making, and they were constructed by cutting, folding, and lacing. Care was given to finding good spruce roots, same way the Tlingit harvested their spruce roots. Birch bark was taken in the spring from trees with a lot of sap and not too many knots. First, they would do a small test sample. The area was cut by knife and a small strip was taken off. It was folded in half and folded again to be sure it wouldn't crack. Once determining the bark was usable, then a big piece was taken. Using a knife, the bark was cut down the tree, then carefully torn off by rubbing a stick sharpened flat into a wedge up and down inside the bark. After the bark was off the tree, it was rolled up with the inside of the bark facing out and tied with willows, then stored in a cool place until it was used. To make the basket, the bark was placed in water to dampen and clean it. Then a pattern was used, and scissors were used also to cut out the pattern. It was folded at the corners, basted together with willow, and sewn with spruce root that had been soaking in water. The sewing was done by poking holes in the birch bark with an awl, and then pushing the spruce root sharpened to a point through the hole, creating stitches. Willow saplings were sewn around the outside middle and around the top of the basket for reinforcement. Birch bark baskets ranged in size from small baskets to cradles and even canoes. They were traditionally used as cooking vessels instead of art objects. Aleut basketry was woven from beach grass called wild rye. It was probably the most notable of the Alaskan baskets. Floral designs were woven in them, and this showed the influence of Russian occupation. A typical Aleut household would have grass mats. They would have covers on the wall from grass. Woven containers were used for collecting, storing, cooking food. People would even wear woven socks and mitts and caps. And they even made woven tools like harpoons and lines for harpoons and boats. Beach rye or lime grass was the most commonly harvested wild grass. It was cut between June and September. Then the grass was dried and it was bleached by the sun. The leaves were removed, and when the drying was complete, the midrib from each leaf was removed, and the leaf was split into strands of desired thickness. Weaving the grass baskets was time-consuming, and it took great skill to produce the tiny even stitches. Beginning at the base, the basket was constructed by twining thick, flexible horizontal strands together between vertical strands, and these baskets were woven so tightly that the texture was compared to linen. False embroidery was also used to embellish the baskets, and natural resources used to dye, like blueberries, blackberries, cranberries, and so forth. The Inuit coiled basketry, in its early form, was small and undecorated. The coiling method was adopted because it provided a sturdier container than the traditional twined grass basket. Its distinctive feature came from being sewn rather than woven. By the 20th century, coiled basketry had turned into a fine art form with decorations of beadwork, colored grasses, birds, and animal skins, and attached ivory carvings. Also in the fall, the wild grass blades would be plucked and cured and dried and dyed, again using natural resources like yellow came from onion skins, blue from blueberries. Today, basket weaving remains a woman's skill taught through individual instruction, communal weaving, and experience. Weaving symbolizes pride in native heritage and the passage of knowledge from one generation of women to the next. Dorothy Churchill reflects on this native pride and heritage and says, "I make baskets because I think it's the spirit that is handed down to us from centuries back. It draws us because we don't want to lose that thread, and it is so fragile that we feel we are the bearer of the spirit that comes down through us, and it has to continue. It's so important that the money is not important because you'll spend that, but this thing will go on to somebody else." The art of basketry speaks a statewide language exhibiting a common thread and purpose among the 7 Alaskan Native cultural groups.